just remember the man you're listening to was run out of his party and run out of government, just as Russell Broadbent's been. Now, you and I, Craig, I think were one of few, you couldn't count them on your hand, where every day I made the point that on the government's own figures, 99% of those who tested positive, over 99%, were not serious.
That's right. Look, the data was there from the word go. The best data they had in the world was out of Israel. The Israelis had set that up, showing the number of people that had been vaccinated, those hospitalised, those that had COVID. And you could see from early April that the vaccines were showing basically zero efficacy of preventing infections. You could see that from early April. We broadcast that on some of your programs. Those programs were banned by social media companies. They were taken off the air, and we were quoting direct evidence, direct facts from official government statistics.
Those programs were banned. I had an interview organised and pre-recorded with Professor Peter McCulloch, the American cardiologist and epidemiologist, world acclaimed, Professor of Medicine at the Texas College of Medicine. I was forbidden from going ahead with the interview. So, Craig, you take things like ivermectin. There were senators and MPs with no medical experience, had done no homework, but you weren't even allowed to debate it or mention it. So Big Pharma was calling the shots, and the regulator, TGA, was on Big Pharma's side.
Alan, there were times I tried to debate that in the federal parliament, and YouTube censored the proceedings of the Australian Parliament. Unprecedented, I think, in any of our Western democracies, that these social media companies were censoring the proceedings of the Australian Parliament. And this was a time all we were doing was quoting the evidence and expert opinion. And we know, Alan, the reason why ivermectin hydroxychloroquine had to be banned, because there is a provision under US law that a new drug, a new experimental drug, cannot obtain an emergency use authorization if there are other effective treatments. So here you had this $200 billion potential industry. It was the greatest payday for some of these pharmaceutical executives that they would ever see in their lifetime. And what stood between those people and that $200 billion? Ivermectin hydroxychloroquine.
That's correct.
And we had people demonising it. President Trump, the minute that President Trump mentioned the word hydroxychloroquine, we had large sections of the media in Australia saying, not only this has to be wrong, but it has to be dangerously wrong. We saw fraudulent trials. There was a trial by a company called Surgisphere, which on the basis of which the World Health Organization suspended the investigation into hydroxychloroquine. And it's found out, even though this was published in The Lancet, that trial was used fabricated, made up data. The people behind it, they just made the data up, created the data. And that was later retracted from
that. You referred often to the study done and co-authored by two remarkable Australians, Professors Robert Clancy and Thomas Borody. It was published. You and I were forbidden to mention ivermectin, even though the authors argued, and I quote, there is currently a lack of effective treatment for early or ambulatory patients with COVID-19. Patients testing positive are sent home to isolate, and generally no specific line of treatment is prescribed in this phase of the illness. However, there is growing evidence that certain repurposed drugs with good safety profiles taken early can significantly improve outcomes. Now, they were talking, of course, about this tiny pill, which Australians were denied. The governments, as Craig has said, were prisoners of the big pharmaceutical companies, and we'll never know how much those companies were paid. We still haven't been told what they were paid. But Dr. Chalmers, Craig, says spending is causing interest rate increases, but billions were spent telling Australians that everything was free, when in fact it wasn't.
Well, Alan, nothing is free. When the government borrows money like they did, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars into the billions of dollars that was borrowed, that eventually has to be paid for by the public. And that is being paid for now in higher interest rates. So every time every Australian goes to the shop and sees the price of everything from a loaf of bread to a bottle of milk, their supermarket bills going up, their electricity bills going through the roof, everything that they see in that their pay packet being whittled away in inflation is because of the reckless spending of the previous government. And also, as you mentioned before, this government with this absurd, unprecedented record levels of migration.